A friend asked me what was on my mind, and the answer is almost always anime, so I thought it was a good time to have another friendly conversation. So, there's not a whole lot going on in the anime industry, in the anime world right now that I think is really worth discussing, at least personally. It seems that a lot of the fan community in America right now is really obsessing over particular lawsuits involving a domestic distribution company and several domestic English language voice actors. Any of you who have known me for any length of time know that I have very little interest in English language voice actors, so I'm simply going to forego all of that conversation and focus strictly on what I consider anime and not drama. So one of the first things that's really intriguing and really exciting to me is the recent announcement that Non Non Biyori is getting a third season. I'm probably one of many people that have watched all of the previous Non Non Biyori anime, which includes the original series, Non Non Biyori Repeat, the second TV series, and the Non Non Biyori Vacation motion picture. There are also the first season and second season OADs. So those kind of get rolled into the first two TV seasons. If you're unfamiliar with Non Non Biyori, it is available from Sentai Filmworks, although I believe it's either out of print or going out of print. Excuse me if I'm incorrect about that. But in terms of Iyashike anime, in terms of slice of life, really enjoyable, amusing, lighthearted anime, it's very difficult to beat Non Non Biyori. So I highly recommend it, and it's also one that I'm dearly excited about to hear that we're getting a third season. Also interesting is the announcement of not just a new Mamoru Oshii anime production, but an entirely new anime production studio. The Japanese company Ichigo, which happens to own the Akiba Culture Zone building in Akihabara, is launching its own anime production studio called Ichigo Animation. And the first production that Ichigo Animation is going to produce is a brand new Mamoru Oshii production, which reportedly Oshii himself has been mulling over and developing in his mind for over a decade now. Now that may be good news, maybe it isn't, it's hard to say, because for example, Garm Wars was a production that Mamoru Oshii had been considering and developing in his mind, that had been in the back of his mind for years and years and years. It was a film that he said that he wanted to wait until he was able to make with the current technology that could realize his artistic vision. However, sadly, the Garm Wars movie is, well, to put it simply, it's bad. It's really almost completely incoherent. It moderately looks okay, but it doesn't really matter how it looks when you can't understand any of it. But then again, Mamoru Oshii is very, very famous for having created the Ghost in the Shell anime. And I say created because I'm sure that plenty of you are aware that despite being based on Masamune Shiro's original manga, Oshii's movie is dramatically and drastically different from Shiro's original manga. So Mamoru Oshii is still one of the most visionary, one of the most unique, one of the most progressive anime directors and creators out there, always really pushing the envelope of what anime is capable of and what technology is utilized within anime. So the idea that in the spring or perhaps summer of next year we'll see a new anime series from Mamoru Oshii is very, very exciting. On the domestic front, I have to admit that I don't extensively keep up to date with adult anime. So it came as a little bit of a surprise to me that the website Hentai Haven announced that it was back, because I wasn't aware that it had gone away in the first place. But apparently this past week, the streaming adult anime site Hentai Haven came back online, particularly with an announcement that it was aiming to follow in the footsteps of distributors, and I use that term initially, at least loosely, distributors including Crunchyroll and Faku, because Hentai Haven is apparently aiming to go legit. I think this is very fascinating because at least a number of years ago, companies including you'll have to excuse me. Once again, when I don't do this day after day like I used to professionally, certain names slip my mind. Because I was going to say Pixiv. It's not Pixiv because that's the website. It's not Pixar because that's the American. Pixie. I want to say it's Pixie refused to license a lot of their adult anime titles to America because they were very concerned about the prominence and prolific nature of online unlicensed distribution, which is one of the things that Hentai Haven has made a name for itself doing. So the idea that we may possibly get a domestic licensed free adult anime streaming site, for example, an adults-only pornographic parallel to Crunchyroll, is really fascinating to me. It's definitely an evolution in American distribution, and it's also a dramatic sign of the evolution in the receptiveness of Japanese distribution companies. So I have no affiliation whatsoever with the Hentai Haven website, but I do wish the best for them, as I wish the best for any industry trying to work professionally and legitimately in the anime industry and the anime distribution industry, because ultimately all of this is beneficial to people like me and people like you, the fans who ultimately watch and enjoy anime of all stripes and varieties. So, if you'll allow me to shift the conversation a little bit, I've recently been listening to the latest Leo Ieiri album. Leo Ieiri is a J-pop vocalist. She has done actually, perhaps only one anime theme song. I believe it was her very first single. The song Sabrina was one of the, I believe it was an ending theme song for the Toriko anime. That was 5 or 6 years ago now. But this past week, she released her 6th studio album called Duo. So I've been listening to that because I'm quite a fan of Leo Ieiri. Initially, her first album was very, very rock, very mainstream pop-oriented, with a particularly acoustic, guitar and drum-heavy emphasis. Her subsequent albums were much more folk rock fusion, which really appealed to me. However, I'm a little torn on her latest album, Duo, the one that was just released this week. It does include the song Moshi Kimi o Yareseta, which, and I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, but that is a wonderful, beautiful song. It's definitely among the best she's ever recorded. However, it's a bit of an unusual song because it does sound like it could have come from one of her earlier albums. And moreover, it's very different in tone from the rest of the album. Some of the songs on the album, especially the later tracks, the B-side tracks, do sound like real instrumentation with real guitars and real drums, like her traditional sound does. But a lot of the A-side tracks have a very contemporary, sort of urban, almost R&B influence. The music sounds very, I could say, produced, very synthetic. It's out of character for her, and I think as we tend to do while listening to albums over and over, we get used to it, we become more familiar with it. We tend to stop comparing to earlier albums and look at this latest sound in isolation. So I'm becoming more agreeable to it, but I simply don't think that this is her strong suit. I don't think that this is one of her strongest albums. So let me shift gears once again, perhaps to, I guess you could call this third gear. I suppose I could laugh and joke that that was a intentional One Piece pun, but it wasn't. It just popped into my mind. I suspect that I have a opinion that coincides with what many of you are feeling, that this current season of anime, which started in March, was supposed to be a smaller, more concise season, which would allow for higher quality, because we had roughly half as many new shows. They could be better programs. Sadly, it seems like that's not fulfilling the initial promise. There are fewer shows this season, but sadly, there aren't a whole lot of really exceptional shows this season. Now, if you are familiar with the AnimeNation forum, which I will discuss more at the end of the recording, at the end of our conversation, you may be aware that I tend to post on the Ask John section of the forum a running record and my thoughts on what I'm watching. So if you're ever curious, I encourage you to log on and take a look. But in case you have not been following that or don't have the time, if you're watching this, maybe you're curious about what I'm watching and what I'm thinking of it. So let me give you some quick rundowns. I do not know if the current second season of One Punch Man is directly adapted from the manga, because if it is, I fear that the manga sort of went off the rails a little bit. I think a lot of people have noticed that the past few episodes have been lacking in a singular focus. They've been jumping around quite a bit in story. I see how the current episodes are trying to develop suspense. They're trying to make people salivate in anticipation of Saitama really unleashing. However, it's getting to the point at which the show might actually just be losing viewers because it's taking so long. It's prolonging the fulfillment of expectations so long that I'm afraid that people like me might actually start losing interest. I'm not actually certain, because it's been so long since I watched the original Akihara Daichi Fruits Basket anime, I'm not sure exactly how the current season is comparing. My mind, which again may be flawed, is telling me that the story development in the current season is starting to vary a bit from the first television series. The most recent episode, actually the episode before the most recent of the current Fruits Basket, was particularly emotionally manipulative. But then again, I can't really fault it for being very manipulative if it was also very effective. I'm still not entirely sold on the character design. I think that the original first Akihara Daichi television series had a much softer, more pleasant character design. The current character design is a little bit sharper, a little bit more angular. So I don't think it's quite as appealing. But I do think the current Fruits Basket anime is one of the highlights of the current season. But then again, it is also a reboot, or you could say remake, of a previous anime rather than something completely unique and original. I was very tentative about the first episode of Hitori Boshi no Marumaru Seikatsu, and I can't say that it's especially getting better, but I guess perhaps like a fungus, it's starting to grow on me. Now that there are more characters, the focus is less on Hitori Bochi herself and her psychological weaknesses, so therefore it doesn't feel as one-trick pony, so it's a little bit more accessible now. I am impressed by the current Mitsutaro Adachi Mix television series. I'm sure many of you are aware that it's a loose sequel to Touch, which is widely considered one of the all-time classics of sports anime, if not just anime in general. In the first 5 or 6 episodes of Mix, almost nothing whatsoever has actually happened. However, what's very fascinating is that the show is still very, very engaging due strictly to the strength of the characterizations. So I give the show a lot of credit for that. I want to give a lot of credit to Joshi Kause. It's a show that's trying to evolve a gimmick of having no spoken dialogue. However, the production values on the show are just so bad. And I have trouble forgiving the show because if it doesn't have to spend a whole lot of money on voice actors, although it does still employ voice actors for grunts and noises, shouldn't it be able to put more money into its animation quality? But moreover, a lot of people may not be aware that at least two, actually, if I'm correct, there are 3 of the Studio Ghibli Museum movies that are sound effects only. And not to brag, but having seen those 3 films, they do such a marvelous job of creatively, dynamically, and visually creating a universe of just sound effects. So I'm aware of what anime is capable of doing with this concept, this approach. So that's why I'm so disappointed that Joshi Kause is not living up to its potential at all. Similarly, Gunjo no Magmel is... I'm afraid that I'll be accused of being racist for calling it a Chinese story and calling it weak for that reason. It's not my intention, but it does have some narrative flaws to it. One of the flaws, it tends to make up story points as it goes along. Now, Fairy Tail also does that, but it's been doing it for years and apparently has not heard it. So Gunjo no Magmel may also survive doing the same thing. But there are also quandaries that are very problematic and troubling. For example, the main character, Inyo, seems to be very opposed to the idea of other people harming wildlife and killing animals in the continent of Magmel. However, he has no hesitation whatsoever to killing the exact same animals. So it's a very unbalanced, sort of hypocritical perspective, which really undermines the entire show. I'm enjoying Kimetsu no Yaiba a little bit more than I expected to. It's totally similar to Naruto. I think more so than Boruto exactly, but if you're a fan of the original Naruto, or perhaps Naruto Shippuden, but more particularly, if you're a fan of the tone, the style of the original Naruto, the original character, him growing, him learning, the main character being equal parts skilled and lucky as he gains experience, you may find that Gunjo no Magmel is a current shonen anime that may be appealing. The animation quality is especially good. The narrative is still developing. We still have a character who's not really flawless at what he does, but there's promise that he will become a very skilled fighter as the series progresses, which is intriguing. On the other hand, Mayonaka no Occult Coleman is a little disappointing because the main character is phenomenally dense. He's an adult. He somehow passed his exams to work as a government official, but he really has no common sense whatsoever. I like the concept of a government body that polices supernatural creatures in modern day Tokyo, If you're a fan of, for example, Durarara, you might be interested in Manaka no Occult Coleman. If you're a fan of Manaka Nightwalker, which I'm sure many of you may have actually heard of, because it's a rather old title, you may be a fan of this show, but it definitely has some compromises. Similarly, Sawayaki Kitsune no Senko-san is supposed to be a Yashike anime. It's clearly intended to be a healing anime. But one of the characteristics of all healing anime, shows like Tamayura, shows like Non Non Biyori, they always have very soft, very warm character design. Sawayaki no Kitsune Senko-san, however, does not have that very soft, warm, rounded character design. It has much more of a style reminiscent of Tsukasa Kotobuki. If you're familiar with, for example, the later Sailor Marionette anime, it's a much more angular, almost potato-ish, deformed character design like that, which really does not lend itself at all to the tone of Yashike anime. Further, the pacing does not work well, so this show really seems like it should have been a domestic comedy instead of a Yashike anime. Probably would have been much more successful had it just been a conventional domestic comedy, perhaps along the lines of something like, once again, you'll forgive me, the title has slipped my mind. I'm particularly thinking of the Sanrio anime about the Zodiac characters that live together. It was Nyanko something or other. I'll move on. I'm sure that in the comment section someone can remind me. Carole Tuesday from Shinichiro Watanabe, certainly one of the highlights of the season. Not surprising that it's another music anime. I think it's fascinating that it's very subtly, but very, very deliberately setting up a contrasting parallel between AI-created artificial music and very analog, very human music. For example, in the most recent episode, we got to hear for the first time an AI-created song. The song itself isn't bad, but the lyrics are very, very simplified, whereas the song that Carole Tuesday wrote, much more complex, robust, and nuanced. So I think I respect the show for respecting the viewer's intelligence. So definitely this is one of the highlights of the season, despite it being a very, very grounded, albeit futuristic, drama. Sarazanmai, of course, definitely not for everyone. That goes without saying because it's a Kunihiko Ikuhara anime. This is a show that plays on the traditional Japanese folktale of kappa extracting souls through people's butts. Ikuhara, who is known for Yurikuma Arashi, Shoujo Kakume Utena, and Mawara Penguin Drum, is outdoing himself with the visual creativity, which is an alternate way of saying visual weirdness, in Sarazanmai. I'm also tremendously impressed that over the first 5 episodes, the show continues to reveal new character depth, new elements and new revelations of the story that are completely natural, that are clearly pre-planned and laid out. So the story continues to become deeper and more complex. So that's a very, very welcome reward to viewers this season, in a particularly weak season. And finally, I've not always been a Gundam fan, and frequently when creators create a story, they create the most exciting part of the story first. So side stories and origin stories are usually weaker, but I'm very impressed that the Gundam the Origin television series is actually quite impressive. It's quite dramatic, it's quite engrossing, despite the fact that it's set prior to the UC-79 era, so we don't have the conventional Gundam mecha that we're used to seeing. So despite the fact that it's not telling the most exciting era of the Gundam storyline, it's still a very, very engrossing political drama. Now, on the subject of mecha, I was at a local gaming store this couple days ago, and I happened to find this. Now, some of you possibly may recognize what this is, but I think this is particularly unique because I imagine most of you probably won't recognize this. This is, as you can see, the Mamoru Nagano's 5-Star Stories manga, but what's particularly unique about this version is this is the Kinokuniya English language release. I think a lot of contemporary anime and manga fans have no idea that Mamoru Nagano's 5-Star Stories was ever released in English. Moreover, for die-hard, unique collectors, this is a particularly unique version. And let me explain why, if you'll indulge me into elaborating with a little bit of a lecture here. This is the original Toys Press and Kinokuniya, what I call prototype 5-Star Stories Issue 1 English language version. This, you can see, is actually a $5.98 cover price and was released in 1997. I imagine that may be before some of you were even born, in fact. But this version, you can see, has simplistic black covers. This was the only issue printed. This was printed as a sort of a test run to see how it would go over in the market. This was printed, as I mentioned, in 1997 and was originally $5.98. Subsequently, Kinokuniya in 1999, 2 years later, republished the first issue. And you can see this version has a completely different cover, and it has the same cover art but different colors on both the front and back. This version had a cover price of $9.98. As I mentioned, this version came out in 1999, and this series ran for 27 issues, 29 issues. It ran somewhere up to around 30 issues. Sadly, I only have them up into the 20s personally. The early issues, for example, this one, are relatively inexpensive, but if you are a collector, if you're an investor, if you ever come across the very, very high number issues, they're extremely rare. They're quite valuable. They're up in the hundreds, in the $100+ range for any of the very, very final issues, because they're extremely rare. But as I mentioned, this one was published in 1999, and then in 2002, it was republished. You'll notice that the 1997 version is stapled. The 1999 reissue, square-bound, does not have the full cover art on the back. So there are, as far as I'm aware, at least 3 different editions of the first issue of the English language FSS manga. Now, I'm absolutely curious. If you know more about this English language release than I do, please let me know. I would be absolutely thrilled to learn more about this very obscure, now sadly forgotten American release. Now, on the subject of books, I also would like to take a moment to encourage you to take a look at my book. If you are unaware, I have taken my personal experience both as a college English language professor and as an anime fan for, once again, no offense intended, but as a diehard anime fan for longer than some of you have even been alive, to compose my own fiction novel inspired by Japanese light novels. This is a cyberpunk drama. It's also a very, or at least hopefully it was intended to be, a very emotional, very affecting, very sad tragedy. This was inspired by Japanese light novels, so all of the typical characteristics that you enjoy in anime, you'll definitely find in my book, Bloody Angel. However, I will admit, if there is one criticism that I've received about the book, it's not exactly easy reading. I did not intend this to be a quick read like a typical light novel. I intended this to be a substantial literate novel. So to that extent, there is a tremendous amount of subtext, symbolism, multiple themes, and analogies, references, analogs throughout the book. In fact, the more you read the book on second reading, you will find, I'm sure, much more meaning, depth, symbolism in the text than you would have recognized from the first read through. The book is available through Amazon. Of course, it's also available through me. So, as I always want to offer, if you'd like a personalized copy, you're always welcome to drop me a note. I would be happy to provide a copy to you. Furthermore, if you would like a copy from me personally and you drop me a note, if you'd like me to inscribe it, if you'd even like me to, for example, write an original couple sentences or a paragraph in the character's voice, in the tone of the text, I'd be happy to do that. Now, of course, that's going to be non-canon, because perhaps someday I will write a concluding sequel to this. But because I invested so much of myself into this book, I really do want people to read it. I honestly don't make a lot of profit on this. So I encourage, if you're interested at all, please do me the personal favor of reading my book. I'd also like to encourage you, if you have any interest in my periodic podcasts, or in particular the AnimeNation forum, which I support through these podcasts and participate in through occasional forum posts, the AnimeNation forum has been around for well over 10 years now, and as you may or may not be aware of, is, as it frequently, sadly is, in a jeopardized position. So I encourage you to take a look at the AnimeNation forum. It's a very welcoming community. We're always glad to have new visitors. We are happy to have visitors return. And in particular, if you'd like to support not necessarily me, but the AnimeNation forum itself, there is a Patreon ongoing. We'll provide a link to the Support the AnimeNation Patreon page in this AnimeNation video conversation description. I myself, at least at present, do not monetize these videos, so I encourage you, if you have feedback, feel free to leave comments, but moreover, send them directly to me. As I mentioned, if you'd like to have a more intimate conversation with me personally, I'd be happy to do that. I love always talking about anime. So if you've managed to stick with me through this entire conversation, I hope you've enjoyed it, perhaps learned something, and I hope that you'll tune back in next time. So thanks for watching.